All right, let's see. We're not quite there yet. Well, good afternoon, everyone. We are back with a guest that visited us not too long ago. This is Julianne Williams, author of Head Above Water, and please visit me on my website, juliannewilliams.com. With me today, I have Paul Jefferson. He is a 52-year-old single dad, father of 3 children, ages 12 through 18. Professionally, he is well recognized as a lawyer that specializes in complex litigation. And in the last video, I should have mentioned it in the beginning, but I'm so proud of him and proud that I get to be his friend, that he's one of the top 100 lawyers in the United States. And so that shows you that Paul is very personally and professionally committed to his life's work, which are both areas of his life, his children and his practice as a lawyer. But what that has brought him to is really honing in on the things that bring him to understanding of himself, helping other people and organizations understand themselves, and helping them get through the impediments that keep all of us from getting there. And the reason that I asked Paul to do a couple podcasts with me is because we've become friends over the years after working together. And he shared a video that he did a presentation at his alma mater. And it's what they call a chapel talk. And in that, Paul discussed some things that were very, very important in terms of, I think, how people should live their life. And if they do this, we'll end up having a much more robust and rich life. So after I twisted his arm a little bit, he told me that he would come back and share a little bit about how values work in our life and how it drives us to the life we want to lead. So Paul, with that, I know you have a really interesting story to share, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks. So back in, well, probably have to rewind a little bit further. So I graduated from law school and did well enough to go to work for the largest firm in Indiana where I live, one of the largest in the country. And I worked really, really hard and became an equity partner there and headed up some groups and did a lot of amazing things. And along the way, I met a client who I helped him sell one of his businesses for more money than I've ever seen in my life. And he started another one and asked me to be a part of it. Part of his recruitment of me was that he told me that he was sick with cancer. He offered me the first 10 million when this business was sold, which I thought was a nice way to make work more of a hobby than a requirement.
Right.
And offered to bring me in as general counsel. So, and he was also someone I considered a friend. At the time, I was separated from my wife. I was living with him in his house. We were pretty close. And during the course of that time, I learned first that he didn't have cancer. He was addicted to substances, specifically cocaine.
Yikes.
And that he had taken the audited financials of the company and changed a lot of the numbers by scanning them in and making them a Word document, and then submitting them to the bank and getting a loan for money for essentially AR that we weren't ever owed. And so there was one morning when I had discovered this and realized that there was no way he was ever going to make good on the promises he made to me, that I'd given up a 7-figure a year job, essentially, to be able to go work for him. And, I had to decide what to do. And so literally while I was brushing my teeth one morning, getting ready to leave and, wearing a very expensive watch, driving a really nice car, and et cetera, I was brushing my teeth and I'm like, what do I do? And of course, my options could have probably included trying to hide it and go back to my firm, doing nothing, or just blowing it all up, telling the bank not to call the loan, making sure that everybody, kind of our clients at this business, knew what was going on. And it became infinitely more difficult because two of the shareholders of the company were his ex-wife and ex-mother-in-law, who I knew had invested their life savings in the business. So the question was, what do you do, right? And while I was brushing my teeth, it was just like, well, there's only really one choice for me, which is um, you do the thing that feels like is full of integrity, and you tell the FBI, and you turn him in, and he ended up serving a 4-year stint in federal prison. 110 people, lost their jobs and had to find other ones. But the company essentially shut down. And it's really not, what's really fascinating to me, Julianne, about that experience as I look back on it is that it wasn't difficult for me to know what I had to do, right? It really, it was, I knew it was important. I knew that it had impacts in a lot of areas of my life, some that I could see and some that I couldn't. But really, it wasn't that difficult. And it also it wasn't like a multiple choice test where there's only one right answer. I mean, I think I probably could have chosen a path that would have been more protective of my family, and my financial interests. And I didn't break the law, and people would have understood that if I'd have chosen that path. But the key for me is that it didn't line up with my values, and it didn't line up with who I am. So I would have spent my whole life from that moment convincing myself and others that what I did was consistent with something that I knew in that moment that I wasn't. They weren't my values. And if and so it's just launched for me this incredibly convoluted, important, hard conversation about what values are and how we use them and how they kind of operate in life. And it's kind of like diets, right? If everybody said, if you eat these 3 things and only these 3 things, you'll have a body that looks like this, everybody would do it, right? But the truth
Right.
of the matter is, some people get there one way and some people get there another. And so we all have to find our path. And values are kind of the same way. My values are courage, honesty, and integrity, but other people's values might be different. And thank goodness, right? I mean,
Mhm.
I'm glad some people really value, organization and other things that I'm horrible at. So, and so, but it's just kind of, it drove home for me the importance of having them, and then it launched me into this big long thought process of literally years of where did they come from, right? Like, I don't think they were just planted in me by some large, like, operation game when I was being, in my mother's belly. I think they were made by all the little decisions we make along our way,
Yeah.
and what do we do when we decide, whether we're going to help someone cross the street, or whether we're going to, make this choice versus that choice. And we're employing our values all the time. It's just whether or not we're cognizant of what they are. And so, and I just find that all fascinating. I mean, I find it all, it, the awareness of it really just makes life easier in many respects, and harder in others, right? I mean,
Hmm.
that that decision certainly had financial ramifications for me and my family. It had other ramifications as well, but I never lived a day since wondering, you ask people, would you tell the truth for $1 million? Like, yeah, I'd tell the truth for $10 million, right? Like,
Yeah.
literally. So, um, and so, not a lot of people can take that out of the abstract. So, um, and so what it's led to is just in day-to-day life, like helping organizations. Like, oftentimes when I have clients and we're trying to figure out what a legal strategy in the case is, I'm like, well, what's your value here?
Hmm.
What value do you want to reinforce? Because how we make choices can depend on that answer. And when I'm parenting children, I'm like, my kids, I'm like, do you want to be known for being right, or do you want to be known for being kind? Do you want to be, you say this is important to you, like, you want to be a kind person, but I just watched you hit your brother, and
Right.
not really a very kind thing. So is that only going to be sometimes, or is it going to be all the time, right? So, and as I've encountered people in my life too, like, like you and I know each other, and I have a good sense of what your values are, and your compass, the needle doesn't bend too far one way or the other on those decisions that matter. And I tend to surround myself with people like that. But gosh, we've all encountered people too who don't know
Mhm.
and don't have a sense of it. And they just kind of flail. And organizations, by the way, are the same way. If you start building a company and you don't know what the values are within that company, you have a leadership team that's acting one way and a group of employees that are acting another, and they never get where they want to be. Um, so it's such a hugely important topic. So I've rambled on enough, probably, but
No, it's all good. So, thinking about that, because as you're talking, and obviously, I listened to your chapel talk, which is what made me want to have you explore this more with me. You think, okay, what are my values? What's the process, that you went through? And like you said, it's not like they were just planted in you, like in the operation game, but can you identify, any of the ways that you realized, oh, this is my value? Or did you make certain choices for a value that you just saw someone and said, that's who I want to be like? How did you establish your three values?
yeah. So sometimes, and we'll start with the fun, like, ways to talk about first. Sometimes it was just little things. Like I remember when I was 5 years old and I was playing football and I hated it, and um, I went to my mom and I'm like, I want to quit, and she's like, well, you're finishing out the season because you made integrity, you made a commitment, and you have to have integrity when you make a commitment. So at the end of the year you can not play again, but you'll finish it out. And I'd never thought of that before, right? I mean, I
Right.
was 5, so,
Yep.
but I still remember that. And so that, finishing what I started and doing the right thing and thinking about ways it affects other people kind of started then. And I just, I've always, I just remember times in my life where I've also realized that kind of my actions impact other people in terms of what I say and how I say them. And
Hmm.
so, sometimes I've hurt people by not thinking that through. And
Hmm.
um, so then I have to step back and go, well, is that consistent with my values? And then some of the lessons are really painful. I mean, in the talk I gave, I tell the story of one Tuesday in February of 2000. I had dinner with my mom, and my grades had just come out at law school. And I got into law school on the waiting list because I didn't let school get in the way of my education in undergrad. So, um, and so I was scared to death. So I studied really hard, and I got all A's or A minuses the first semester. And I was like, oh, wow, this is what happens when you actually do the work. And then so I was out to lunch with my mom, and I was explaining to her kind of how the law school system works, which is that if you do really well, then it kind of snowballs, and judges ask you to clerk for them, and firms ask you to work for them that pay more money than my mother had ever seen in her life as a starting salary. And she was really happy, as a mother is. And I got the impression she kind of thought it was like, you get a free an A, you go to Dairy Queen and get a free ice cream cone. But I'm like, no, actually, this means I can get a $2,000 a week job this summer. Um,
Yay.
and uh, and then she looked at me and she said, um, "That's all great, but I don't want you to grow up and be one of those ostentatious lawyers." And so, and my mom, you know, when she said that, she had no idea of knowing, but she died less than a week later.
I
And that's the
know.
last conversation I had with her. So that same morning, I'm brushing my teeth. I'm wearing a Patek Philippe watch. I'm wearing a Brooks Brothers suit. I'm wearing an Italian silk tie. I'm walking out of my house, probably wearing $40,000 worth of things, right? Getting into a car that costs more than my first home. And now my first home was pretty cheap, but still, it was a car. And and I'm just like, you've lost your way. I mean, because, and not because I had those things, by the way, because I thought they mattered.
Right.
Because I thought they showed something about me that I had them or drove them or whatever, and they don't. I mean, I'd love to have those things again, just if nothing else, just to see if I feel like I own them or they me,
Yeah. You're like, let me test it again and see if I
But
really,
but
no stress.
I realized that part of the reason maybe this situation was landing in my lap I mean, it was hard. It's hard to sit down. I mean, I called a shareholders meeting and I pulled everybody in, including my boss and my friend and the person I'm living with. I'm like, here's a 15-page memo I'm giving to the FBI if you don't do X, Y, and Z. And he wouldn't do it, so I gave it to the FBI. So, um, like, that was a big day. But,
Hmm.
I kind of needed that day to realize both all the things I'd done well, but also, frankly, all the things I hadn't, And, um, I'd love to say that I have always lived in alignment with my values, but that was a painful lesson to learn that I wasn't.
Hmm.
The benefit of that is, 10 years ago or so, I kind of got a harsh correction, and I find it much easier to say no to those things now. Um, but yeah, I mean, so it's a combination, right, of doing the right thing and seeing how that feels, and also just getting that kind of punch in the gut of, oof, like this isn't the path you want to be on. You got to go back a few steps. So,
So, I was thinking a little about, losing my husband, and, you know, like you said, I mean, there are many decisions that you can make when you're in difficult situations. And some I know I made really good decisions, and others I look back and, I probably wish I would have done something else. Now, it wasn't like, I mean, it wasn't a decision that obviously totally derailed me and my ability to raise my family. But, there are some things that, I look back and I wish I would have handled them differently. But, like we talked on our last podcast, sometimes you're just not strong enough at the moment to apply every single principle, in your life at that moment. So how do you have any idea? And I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but do you have any ideas that you could share with people that when they're, in a situation of grief, or they've, whether it's from losing a person, losing their job, um, just life not panning out the way they wanted it to, they get really bad news about their health. How are some ways that you found that you could stand within your value system as you were navigating hardship?
so in those situations, the world tends to get a lot smaller, right? Like the things that matter are the things that matter, and the things we thought that mattered don't. And that pain always teaches us that, right? I mean, it it's a hard lesson, not one I want again, and not one,
Hmm.
but we're all going to experience loss in our life. We're all
Hmm.
going to experience fear. We're all
Hmm.
going to experience those things. Um, but they're also just such powerful teachers, right? They teach us what matters, because
Hmm.
the things that don't matter aren't. I mean, we know right then, right? If we were all told we would die tomorrow, I'm guessing we'd live our evening differently. So
Hmm.
why not tell ourselves that? The Buddhists have a great mantra. What would death say when you're making a choice? And so, um, and so I guess the advice I have is think about how you'll feel in those situations and think of what will matter to you then. And that doesn't mean that you don't have to do the things we all have to do to live, right? I mean,
Hmm.
we all have to pay our electric bill, but
Hmm.
but there is an attitude about it, and a way of just making sure that the things that matter happen. And then the other thing is, to the extent that if it's a crisis, then you'll find intentionality kind of on your own. But if you can find it before then, it makes the crisis a lot easier to navigate. Um, I mean, I think that's one of the benefits religion gives us, is it gives us a set of values that
Hmm.
um, we can adhere to, as well as a community that shares them.
Hmm.
Um, I think that, for me, there have been times in my life where I've just had to get away. I mean, there was a time in my life after this experience that I went on top of a mountain by myself for 4 days and didn't eat, just so I could think about who I was and how I wanted to be and how to live in alignment with why I think I'm here. Now,
Hmm.
not everybody is as knuckleheaded as I am and needs that big of a, a time
Yeah,
away.
actually, that's a little bit biblical in a lot of ways, and
It is.
fasting really does, because we have the flesh is in the place that it's in. Fasting really does help bring forth those thoughts.
Well, the hardest, the best and worst thing for me about that time is food is a distraction from our thoughts, right? Like,
Hmm.
what do I make for dinner? Who am I meeting? When you are alone and you have nothing with you but what's in your brain, you learn a lot about yourself.
Hmm.
At least I did.
Hmm.
And I always liken it to, when you're surfing the internet and you've got like 100 tabs open at the top and you can't find anything.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes we're in life, and all those things are equal size, by the way, right?
Hmm.
They all have the same. And so you just need to narrow them down so you can see what you're looking at and get rid of the ones that you don't really need. And, that's what I think letting go and simplifying does. And
Hmm.
then, when we get in a place where we can navigate life, which is always uncertain and always and never permanent and always comes with some joy, but also some struggles, at least we know our internal compass is true. And, when you talked earlier about the things that are hard, there's the type of hard because things hard, a thing is hard or difficult. And then there's also the type of difficulty that comes with knowing we weren't true to ourselves.
Hmm.
And that pain is is a different and deeper one that um yeah, I just, I'm sure I'll experience it again in my life, but I really
Hmm.
hope I don't.
Right.
So, yeah.
No, it's interesting that you say that. You made me think, when my husband, before he passed away, he was, for those people who don't know, he suffered from bipolar disorder and took his life. The last, we'll call it 9 months of his life was, beyond difficult. It felt like we were just living in a nightmare. He, moved in another house. He disappeared for periods of time. It was a very difficult time. He also is in inpatient psychiatry. Um, and he did a lot of things to me that were very, very, I'll just say, painful. And but no matter what, I just kept loving him, and I was not willing to give up. And even after, spending a lot of time with my pastor, who said, Julianne, you're taking on so much, and any other normal person would find a way to move forward. And I just kept saying, I'm not going to give up on him. And he said, look, I'll support you in whatever you want to do, but you're suffering from continuing to hold on. In the end, after my husband took his life, I was never more grateful for the fact that I took my marriage vows seriously, around the in sickness and in health, because he was sick. And it gave me a few less regrets. There's still some, but it gave me a few less regrets because I held true to that value of, we were married and he was my husband, and I had to do what I needed to do as a wife.
See, and that's exactly what I'm saying is that no one would have faulted you had you walked away, right?
Right.
No one would have said you have to stay in this situation. But you had to find what your truth was,
Hmm.
which and then defend it and stick to it when people were questioning it. And because you did, you ended up in a place where it's not easy. It's not
Mm-mm.
what you want every day.
Mm-mm.
But wow, I mean, that's the thing we share is that I know I was true to me. So people can say to me whatever they want along the course of my life about who I am and what they think of me, but I know, right? And you know,
Yeah.
because but those choices start long before that moment. If we wait until that moment to try to figure out what our values are, I, I can't imagine that'll be an easy thing. So I'm so grateful for people like my mother and my
Hmm.
father, who I haven't talked about, but who's frankly a jerk and taught me a lot of things in a lot of other ways, right? Like
Yes.
when someone is not a nice person, it forces you to adhere to your values in a completely different context.
Hmm.
And so, I mean, and it's such, I mean, so nobody can take that away from you, right? That you did
Right.
it your way and you were true to you.
Yes. Yes. And it's interesting that you said about your dad. I even tell people at work, you know, sometimes we have bosses that are not good. I mean, I've had a couple. I'm sure you've had a couple. Well, you had the ultimate bad one, obviously, right? That catapulted you into this whole thing. But the reality is that we have people in our life that cause us difficulty, make us uncomfortable, and maybe they're not kind. In the end, I've learned, believe it or not, more from those people than I have from the people who
Right.
are amazing. Although I've learned a ton from them, and I have a couple of people that are just, for me, the ultimate women, strong, wonderful women that have really been who I've tried to emulate, in many areas of my life. But if you can step back and realize that people that cause us pain or are difficult, and there's so much to learn from that. Not only how you maybe don't want to be, but it also teaches you how to learn to respond. And I'm not going to say react, respond appropriately through those situations.
Right. And I heard a great quote recently, which is that forgiveness is wishing your life were not any different.
Oh.
And it's like, and the only way I think to get there in a situation like, when someone passes away or someone does us wrong, is to realize the gifts that we're given in that
Hmm.
process. Because the truth of the matter is, I wouldn't go back and change anything. I mean, that doesn't mean I like everything about it,
Right.
but things I do like are so important to me and so important to my life now that I
Hmm.
can't imagine unwinding that and unwinding all of this.
Right.
So, um, and it's a lesson that I don't want anybody else to have to learn, but
Hmm.
it landed in my lap, and so I'll learn what I can from it, and that's the way I kind of honor that experience, I guess. Um, I'll never know what it's like to be in your situation with the spouse and have it end that way. Um, but man, I would think that it's a powerful teacher, and I'm sorry you had to go through it.
Yeah. It definitely, and I think too, it gives us, sadly, I guess, or maybe fortunately, and I kind of lean toward the fortunately now that I'm in a place where I am now. Fortunately, it gives us the opportunity to help other people. It gives us the opportunity to reflect on what's important. I will tell you that after losing my husband in the way, at all, and in the manner in which I did, and all of that, when things happen, they just don't feel that difficult. I mean, it's not that I don't have to find solutions, or it's not that it's not hard, but quite frankly, it doesn't feel, there's nothing that feels as devastating or as debilitating as that experience. And so it does actually help me on a daily basis to keep a lot of things in perspective that probably before would have overtaken me.
Right, and I also would think that it helps me focus on, like, I know who I am.
Hmm.
I know what those experiences have made me. I see a lot of I wouldn't say my friends, but a lot of people in my world who just kind of run after the next shiny thing, right? Whether that's relationships, whether that's jobs, whatever, and they're never happy,
Right.
and they think the next thing on the horizon will solve all their problems, and it doesn't. And I care about them, but that's not how I live anymore, because that those hard experiences have taught me what matters.
Hmm.
And I don't chase the things that don't matter. And if something or someone or situation doesn't serve me, then it's okay to let it go.
Hmm.
And because I've let go of a lot of big things. So
Yeah, haven't we?
right.
Haven't we all?
So, and sometimes, it's just, I'm sure it's frustrating for people sometimes because I can't care about things that aren't important, at least aren't important in, to me or the people I love. So, yeah.
Well, but again, that goes back to saying, these are my three values. And, people can have one or five or whatever it works for them. But for you, you listed three. And those are your three guiding principles. And so for you to approach it differently and to allow things into your life that don't serve you, if you do that, then again, why have the values? That's the whole point, is it focuses the way that you live and what the experience in life that you want to have.
Yes. And it makes it okay that if someone doesn't have the same values as I do, then maybe we can't, I've a couple months ago, I had to fire a client who was willing to pay me a lot of money to file a lawsuit, but it was because he wanted to make his former business partner's life hell, and not because there was an actual problem to solve. And I'm like, I'm not your guy. Like,
Yeah.
I can't. I mean, there are lawyers who will take that case. Some did,
Oh,
but I just can't, and I won't. Um, and it was a really easy decision, in that respect, but it's because of those other things that have happened.
yep.
So, yeah, yeah.
All right. Well, I think a couple of lessons I learned from you that I hope people take away. Number one, you I know that there's a lot of books and other things around how we use principles to guide our life, but I would say that one lesson from Paul that I've learned is, um, find your values and really stay true to them so you can be true to yourself. The second thing is, we all know we're going to have difficulties. And one of the most important things we can do is work on establishing what our values are, identifying them. Right. I mean, that's a great thing to sort of write down and even hang on your mirror if you have a tough time keeping it top of mind. But really making sure that we identify what those are and doing the work behind it so that when things do get hard, it makes it, we'll just say, easy, for the lack of a better word. And then the last thing is that, when we do apply our values in difficult situations, it allows us to continue to make the choices that lead us to continuing the life in our value system. That's what I've learned from you. I don't know. Is there anything else you think that, you would like to?
Well, I'm just flattered that you take that away from it. I can't imagine navigating life without knowing what I'm about. And gosh, I hope that I help my kids figure that out for themselves. And sometimes my clients and organizations figure it out along the way, because it just makes life more peaceful. You
Mhm.
use the word simple. I think it's the difference between simple and easy, right?
Right.
Sometimes it's very, very difficult, but it's not a it's not a difficult choice to choose a difficult path sometimes.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
right,
because it's the right one according to how
right,
you choose to live your life.
exactly,
So
exactly, and yeah. So, thank you for having me on.
thank you, Paul. Really enjoyed it. I do appreciate it because I love that chapel talk, and I'm glad we got to dive in a little bit deeper today, and you could answer some of my questions about it. And so again, you guys, I want to thank Paul Jefferson, one of my favorite attorneys, if not my favorite, and also one of the favorites of everybody in the United States in the top 100. So I'm just so proud of you for that. I have to mention it every time.
Thanks.
Well,
I'm going to put Julianne's favorite attorney on my bio. So,
that's right. It's definitely like, but actually the very most important thing is I want to say I appreciate you being my friend.
thank you. Likewise. That's the
All
best part.
right. Yeah, it
Thanks.
is. Okay,
All right.
everybody. Well, thank you. And we will talk to you soon. And again, I'll probably try to find another topic for Paul because it's so fun to talk to him. All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye. There we go.